Whether you believe in demons or not, there have been countless stories and reports throughout history that document demonic possession and exorcisms. Now, while I think most things boil down to mental illness, others truly believe people to be possessed by forces not from our plane of existence, an evil that seeks to destroy. Coming in at number 5, we have Clara Germaaina Cele. Back in 1906, Clara was a young South African Christian who was said to have been possessed by a demon at the age of just 16 years old. Clara was a student at St. Michael's Mission in Natal, South Africa during this time, and it was at the age of 16 that she was said to have made a pact with Satan, which resulted in demonic possession, supposedly. In an account written by a nun, it was said that Clara could speak many languages that she wasn't capable of speaking prior to her possession. She was also reported to exhibit clairvoyance, with her revealing secrets and transgressions of people she had never met. It was also reported that Clara could not be in the presence of holy or blessed objects, a classic sign of possession, and when she was, she would seem to exhibit extraordinary strength and ferocity. A nun even stated that Clara would make peculiar sounds, stating, I quote, "No animal ever made such sounds, neither the lions of East Africa nor the angry bulls. At times it sounded like a veritable herd of wild beasts, orchestrated by Satan, and formed a hellish choir." 2 priests went on to perform an exorcism on Clara, with it lasting approximately 2 days. During the exorcism, it was said that Clara knocked the Bible out of the priest's hands and even attempted to choke him. By the end of those 2 days, it was said that the demon was expelled from the girl and that she was healed. Happy days. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps us out a lot in the YouTube algorithm. Coming in at number 4, we have Anna Ecklund. Anna Ecklund is actually a pseudonym for Emma Schmidt, a woman who was allegedly possessed by a demon, with exorcisms occurring over several decades, resulting in one extensive exorcism that took place between August 18th to December 23rd of 1928. Schmidt was born in Switzerland and was raised in a Catholic household in Wisconsin, and on June 18th of 1912, she underwent her first exorcism. After exhibiting signs of possession, including revulsion of holy objects, disturbed thoughts, and inability to enter churches. Now, despite the first exorcism taking place, it appeared to be unsuccessful, with the second exorcism being performed in 1928, with Ecklund being moved to a convent after once again exhibiting strange symptoms, including fits of rage and the inability to be near blessed objects. The second exorcism was reported to be incredibly violent, with Ecklund even levitating and howling during it. The first session lasted until August 26th, with the second session occurring between September 13th to September 20th, followed by a final 8-day session that lasted from December 15th to December 23rd. Ecklund's body began to deteriorate during this time due to lack of food and constant vomiting. On December 23rd, Father Risinger commanded the demons out of Ecklund and seemingly cured her of her possession. Coming in at number 3, we have Michael Taylor. Born in 1944, Michael Taylor was a man from the UK who became notable after he alleged that he was possessed by a demon. Taylor reported feeling evil inside of himself, even verbally lashing out during a Christian fellowship group. His behavior continued to become more erratic, with a local vicar turning to other ministers to call out the demon that was supposedly living inside of Taylor. An exorcism took place between October 5th to 6th, with the ministers believing that after an all-night session they had cast the demons out of Taylor. However, they did state that 3 remained: insanity, murder, and violence. However, Taylor was allowed to go home. When he did return home, though, he brutally murdered his wife, and he was found by local police naked in the street and covered in his own blood. At his trial, Taylor was acquitted on grounds of insanity and was sent to Broadmoor Hospital for 2 years before being sent to a secure ward in Bradford, before ultimately being released. Jumping forward to 2005, Taylor was once again in the news after touching someone inappropriately, resulting in him once again being ordered in psychiatric treatment. Seems less like the devil and more like a deranged human being who should not be allowed to live amongst society. In my opinion, that is.
Number 3 on this list is the exorcism of Terrence Cotrol. Terrence Cottrell's exorcism is a sad story of a little boy who lived in Milwaukee in 2003. Terrence, in his mother's eyes, had been possessed by a demon, and she believed that it needed to be exorcised from him. This wasn't the case though. In fact, it seemed that Terrence had actually been diagnosed with autism. However, the mother refused to believe this was the case and instead convinced herself that he was possessed. In 2003, she drove her boy to a strip mall in Milwaukee where there was the Faith Temple Church of the Apostolic Faith. A bunch of evangelical Christians gathered here and they had agreed to perform an exorcism on Terrence and get rid of this so-called demon once and for all. Sadly, this isn't what happened at all, and as I imagine many of you can expect, Terrence was killed during the ritual. Once he arrived at the church, a sheet was thrown over top of him and it bound his arms and legs. The pastor, Reverend Ray Hemphill, who was performing the exorcism, lay the boy down with the sheet over top of him and then lay on top of him himself, whispering his ritual into the child's ear. This went on for over 2 hours until the Reverend and the group realized that Terrence had died. The official cause of death was listed as mechanical asphyxia due to external chest compression. The pastor had lied on Terrence for too long and his weight basically crushed his chest. This, along with the fact that he'd been wrapped in a sheet, which would have made it difficult to breathe anyways, caused the boy to suffocate. This case was obviously brought to the court of law, and it was revealed that our so-called exorcist was never properly trained on the subject at all. He went to jail for 2.5 years and was barred from performing exorcisms unless he received extensive training on how to do them in the future. Number 2 on this list is an exorcism performed by Father Gabriel Amorth. Father Gabriel Amorth lived for almost a century and performed over 60,000 exorcisms in his long life. He's seen his fair share of demons and possessions, but one story in 1997 sticks out to him as being particularly bad. He co-wrote a book called The Devil is Afraid of Me, where he details his extensive history with exorcisms, so if this is interesting to you, then I recommend checking that out. In that book, they describe this particular exorcism in detail, stating that his curses and threats were aimed solely at the exorcist. Then he began spitting at him and preparing to attack him physically. The book goes on to say that screaming and howling, the demon burst forth and looked straight at him, drooling saliva from the young man's mouth. This was all being conducted on a young man who had apparently been the victim of a demonic possession for months, and it was happening in Amorth's small exorcism room in Rome. Amorth says that after the demon revealed itself, he screamed back, "Whoever you are and all your companions who possess the servant of God, as I command you, tell me your name, the day and the hour of your damnation." To which the demon replied, "I am Lucifer." The room then became icy cold and crystals started to appear on the windows. The young boy began to float in his chair, and actual real-life nails that Amorth still has to this day started to form in this person's mouth. Amorth was bellowing the word of God at this point, and the demonic boy was shrieking at the top of his lungs. Finally, the boy fell to the ground and looked completely spent. This was only the first exorcism performed on this boy, and to fully exorcise the demon, it took Amorth several more months of sessions like this. But up until the day he died, he swore he never saw a demon that had that strong of a hold on somebody's soul. Number 1 on this list is the exorcism of Ryan Eastaugh. Ryan lived back in the 1200s in Ireland. He worked as a fisherman and supported his newlywed wife. Ryan worked with another older fisherman named Hugh, and Hugh had basically taught Ryan everything that he knew. In fact, when Ryan was younger, he was an orphan, and being completely homeless would have to steal to survive. One day, Hugh caught Ryan stealing from him, and rather than get the law involved, decided that he would take Ryan under his wing. That was over a decade ago, and even though Hugh wasn't blood related to Ryan in any way, he may as well have been based on the relationship that the two had developed. One evening, the pair were out on the water longer than they had intended, and a storm whipped up. The men were trying to sail back to shore, but the winds were harsh and unforgiving. With one swift gust, the boat was rocked hard and Hugh was thrown into the waves. Ryan ran to the side of the boat and saw as Hugh struggled to stay above water, but rather than help him by throwing him something or diving in himself, Ryan froze and just stood there. He stood there, planted, indecisive about what to do, and slowly, Hugh drowned right before Ryan's eyes. Ryan managed to weather the storm, and once it subsided, got the boat back to shore, but he was never the same after that. His mood grew dark, his outlook on life was gloomy, and his temper would often rage. His wife, who was now pregnant with his child, feared the worst, believing that Ryan may have become possessed with a demon. Without Ryan's knowledge, she got in contact with an exorcist and had him wait at their home for when her husband would get back. He came home late the night that the exorcist was there, and it was clear that he'd been drinking. He found his wife sitting there with the man, and upon hearing her explanation of the scenario, grew furious. The exorcist saw this deep anger and took it to mean that the demon was coming out and possessing Ryan. As Ryan's anger grew, the exorcist pulled out his cross and started chanting some deep incantation to keep the demon at bay. He barely got through the first few lines though, when Ryan grabbed a nearby bottle and struck the exorcist across the head. The man hit the ground and blood pooled from that large indent that was now sliced across his forehead. He was dead, and Ryan had murdered him. Immediately the fury was replaced with regret, and Ryan dropped to his knees. Sadly, it was too late though. The The deed was done and he was sentenced to death shortly afterwards. Whether Ryan was actually possessed by a demon or not, that's unknown. I personally think the only demons that he was ever possessed with are the demons that he imposed onto himself for never acting when his father figure, Hugh, drowned in front of his eyes. Number 5 on this list is the exorcism of Kennedy Ife. Kennedy Ife was a 26-year-old man who reportedly became possessed by a demon. It started when he got an unexplained pain in his throat and then began to act very strange. He complained that there was a python inside of him and it forced him to bite his own father. He even threatened to cut off his own before his family strapped him to his bed and tied him down. His brother later said to the police that it's clear that this thing was in him what we believed was a demon because it was not natural. It was clearly trying to kill him. Kennedy did sadly die, however it wasn't at the hands of a demon, but actually by his own family. Kennedy had been tied to his bed for 3 days before his brother called for medical help. He was extremely dehydrated and developed breathing problems as he was lying there. When the paramedics got there, they pronounced him dead at the scene. The family had attempted to exorcise this demon out of Kennedy through prayer and extensive force. Kennedy's body had been battered through this exorcism as the family attempted to cure his soul. They were eventually all charged with manslaughter, however the jury found them not guilty in court and they were set free. Personally, I can't even imagine how brutal it would have been to be strapped to a bed for 3 days straight, getting beaten and slowly dehydrating. Truly a horrible way to die. Number 4 on this list is Theodore Laxman. Theodore Laxman was a Russian farmer in the early 1800s. For a long time, Theodore had been in disputes with one of his close neighbors for farmland. They had developed a deep hatred for one another and would often sabotage each other's crops. Laxman eventually reached a breaking point after another blow from his neighbor and ended the dispute once and for all by murdering him and his family as they slept. A season passed and Laxman and his family prospered with the new land and their abundance of crops. However, during this time, something began happening in their home. The family felt unwanted there and signs of a demonic presence could be seen. After a while, the wife couldn't stand it anymore and she demanded that they have an exorcist come look at their home. They managed to find an exorcist several villages over to come and take a look at their house. He set up his supplies and was going to perform a ritual to cleanse the house of any demonic presence. When he began the ritual though, that demonic presence finally made itself abundantly clear. A shadow figure erupted from the wall and forced itself into Theodore's body. It looked like a ghost had immediately entered his soul and taken all control of his actions. Theodore's eyes went immediately bloodshot and he turned to his shocked wife and said the words, "You take from me, I take from you." Then he reached out his hands and before the exorcist could stop him, strangled his own wife in front of his children, killing her where she stood. Right as her body fell to the floor, his did as well, devoid of life. A minute later, he started to slowly rouse himself and after seeing what he had done, broke into a deep sob. He knew that the ghost of his dead neighbor had haunted them and now Theodore was forced to live with the fact that he killed his own wife with his bare hands. Number 3 on this list is Rosetta Planker. Rosetta Planker was a young girl from the 1940s who became possessed by an evil demon. Her parents noticed that she started acting strange when her notebooks began filling up with demonic drawings and her nice innocent attitude vanished for dark depression out of nowhere. She started having issues at school which was completely out of character for her and the parents got to a point where they had to take her out. One day they found her in her room with her eyes rolled to the back of her head, stabbing one of her dolls repeatedly. It was at this point that they realized they had to get a professional in to perform an exorcism. They contacted their local pastor who set them up with a weathered exorcist. This exorcist had seen his fair share of demonic possessions in his day, but even he wasn't prepared for what happened during Rosetta's exorcism. They laid Rosetta on the bed and strapped her in as they typically would. Then the exorcist began performing his ceremony, but it didn't take long for things to get out of hand. Rosetta began to float off of the bed, flailing her limbs as best as she could under the restraints. Her head started spinning around and around in a completely inhuman way, looking as if it was breaking her neck over and over and over again. She was screaming at this point, but it wasn't her voice or any voice that anyone present was familiar with, nor was the voice making any sense, just demonic gibberish nobody could understand. When her ascension reached as high as the restraints would allow, her chest kept going, further up and further up, until finally her chest snapped open and blood exploded everywhere. A black ooze spouted onto her parents, and the exorcist sending them back and disorienting them. The exorcist was forced to stop as he was blown back and covered in this black ooze. When he wiped it off his face and opened his eyes, he saw the ugly remains of Rosetta laying on the bed. The demon had clung onto her soul so tightly that it refused to leave without taking her with it. I can't even possibly imagine what it would have been like to be in that room, or for the parents having to watch something like that. Number 3 on this list is Manuel Vela. Several years ago, Manuel Vela killed his pregnant girlfriend. It was a brutal murder and an incident which climaxed in a police chase where he was finally captured. Many people obviously asked the question, why? And the answer may shock you. The Mystique says Vela told the interviewers that the murder of his girlfriend and her child were part of a religious and political statement. He was possibly trying to enlighten the crowd of his opinion on pro-life ideologies. However, it seemed like his motivation behind the murders wasn't just politically backed. He went on to say how he is the Antichrist and the voices in his head guided him on what to do. Many of his analogies were akin to things that have happened in the history of Christianity. Vela literally believed that he was the Antichrist, guys. That sounds like a pretty textbook example of a demonic possession to me. At this point, Vela's competency to stand trial was in question and a hearing needed to be done. Manuel never actually made it to the hearing though, because in January 2017, authorities found him dead in his cell. He had taken his own life. Number 2 on this list is the Son of Sam. The Son of Sam was a killer that caused one of the biggest citywide police investigations ever. Ranker says New York City during the summer of 1976 was a hotbed of anger, frustration, and fear, and David Berkowitz, aka the Son of Sam, didn't help the matter by killing 6 people and wounding 7 others in the span of 1 year. After his arrest, Berkowitz told police that he was under the control of a demon named Harvey who inhabited his neighbor's dog and implored him to kill people. Once, during a 3-month break from his murder spree, Berkowitz wrote the New York Post to say, "I am still here like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest." After being incarcerated, Berkowitz received a sentence of 365 years in prison, by the way. He became a born-again Christian, but he still believes that the devil and God are fighting for possession of his soul. No wonder this guy got 365 years. Not only did he kill 6 people, but to write to the Times saying that he's still thirsty and hungry, yeah. This is clearly a man that needs to be kept behind bars for literally ever. Once again, I want to stress the fact here that I'm not a religious man personally. When I hear a story like this, I believe that it's far more likely that the Son of Sam was just truly mentally unstable and probably in need of some very serious help. He truly believed, though, that a demon had called upon him and was using his body as a vessel for evil. We may never know what truly caused him to do this, but at least he's locked up for good and won't be doing it again anytime soon. And finally, number 1 on this list is Michael Taylor. Several decades ago, Taylor was apparently possessed by a horrible demon, and this time it really got the better of him. Ranker says in 1974, Michael Taylor was just a simple butcher living in Ossett, England, who was suddenly overcome by an evil spirit. He had an exorcism performed on October 5th and 6th of 1974, and while it went okay, the priests weren't able to expel all of the demons. According to Bill Ellis, an authority on folklore and the occult in contemporary culture, in an all-night ceremony, the exorcist believed that they had invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including those of incest, bestiality, blasphemy, and lewdness. At the end, exhausted, they allowed Taylor to go home, although they felt that at least 3 demons, insanity, murder, and violence, were still left in him. So, you know, kind of the big 3. After he returned home, Taylor immediately murdered his wife by ripping out her eyes and tongue and then tearing off most of the skin from her face, finally strangling their pet poodle. Police found Taylor standing in the street naked and covered in blood, shouting, "It is the blood of Satan." This is truly one of the most graphic crimes I've ever read about, honestly. Like, to think that this happened in real life is extremely scary. Also, if he was possessed by some type of demon, like, What demon was this, and how do we all avoid this? I feel like this is pretty pertinent information considering what Taylor ended up doing.
In fourth place, we have the nuns of Loudun and Louviers. Louviers? My French is 50-50 right now. Time to hop in my little time machine and head back to 1642, when 18 nuns became possessed. Father Mathurin Picard, the nunnery director, and Father Thomas Boule, the vicar at Louviers, were convicted on the evidence of the possessed nuns' recounts. The youngest of the group, being only 18 years old at the time, Sister Madeleine Bavin, was the initial possession victim. Her testimony was successful in throwing the church into a state of panic, alleging that Fathers Picard and Boule had taken the nuns to secret sabbats. At these gatherings, they became familiar with numerous demons, specifically including the demon Damon. Try saying that without tripping over your tongue. Nah. Testimonies quickly followed from the other nuns, reinforcing Madeleine's claims, and after further investigation from the church and its authorities, it was discovered that the nuns were suffering from the classic symptoms of possession. The exorcism rites that followed were made public, enabling the entire town of Louviers to become totally engrossed in the church and its proceedings. After the exorcisms, Madeleine was imprisoned for life, Father Boule was burned at the stake, and the corpse of Father Picard, who had already passed, was exhumed and burned. Moving into the 17th century, in the French village of Loudun, an entire convent of Ursuline nuns were possessed by a series of demons with names such as Leviathan, Astaroth, and Zabulon. These nuns appeared during a series of trials that accused the parish priest, Urbain Grandier, of having made a pact with Satan. Photos of the signed pact still exist, with autographs from the devil and the previous mentioned demons possessing the nuns. In a series of public trials and exorcisms, these nuns barked, screamed, convulsed, and spoke in devil language. These sights led to a public hysteria that ultimately ended in Urbain being burnt at the stake. The events of the Loudun possessions were turned into a book by Aldous Huxley called The Devils of Loudun in 1952, which was then adapted as the 1971 film The Devils. Anyone want to have a movie night? In third place, we have John Jenkin, who also happens to be the most recent case on this list. In the summer of 2013, 25-year-old John from Cumbria, England, expressed fears that he would kill his mother. If it was just a fear, you can't relate some days. Well, in his deranged state, he approached a random van driver, put his hands in the air in a surrender motion, and cried out, "I am armed, but it's not in my hands." Desperate to avoid committing such an atrocity, John tried to end his life by downing a cocktail of whiskey, painkillers, LSD, and attempting to end himself in a river. He was discovered later that day, unstable, and smeared with his own red fluid after self-inflicting. After these events, John was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where staff judged him as low risk and released him. I'm no expert, but I'd hate to see high risk if that's considered, minimal? Later that evening, he confessed to a group of friends that he was possessed by demons, stating, "I am the devil, I need to confess." He said his mother had become aggressive and controlling after the events of that day. And that same night, his sister Katie had confided in one of her own friends that she was really worried about her brother, saying that he didn't seem like her brother and he didn't look like her brother anymore. The next morning, after a brutal argument with his mother and sister, he went downstairs and hit his mother with lots of blows to her head with a sharp end of an axe, and when his sister came downstairs, he attacked her as well to stop her from screaming. I guess the sister was sadly right to be worried. Now, after the killings, John was found stark naked, crouched behind a bench, acting erratically. When a police officer asked him if he had taken anything, he simply replied, "Lives." A court has since sentenced him to a minimum of only 12 years in prison. In second place, time to meet Michael Taylor. In the 1970s, Michael Taylor was largely an ordinary figure in the town of Ossett, Yorkshire. He, his wife Christine, their 5 children, and their pet poodle lived peaceful and happy lives. And now to, pop that Stepford Wives bubble. In 1974, Christine stated to a Christian fellowship group to which they both belonged that his relationship with the leader of the group, Marie Robinson, was carnal in nature. Michael admitted that he felt evil within him and eventually attacked Marie verbally, who screamed back at him. Marie stated that his eyes changed to something bestial and that he began to speak in tongues. Michael had no memory of the event, something all too common in cases of possession. During the next meeting, he received an absolution, but his behavior continued to become more erratic. As a result, the local vicar called in other ministers experienced in deliverance in preparation to cast out the demons residing within the man. The exorcism, which occurred between the 5th and the 6th of October 1974 at St. Thomas's Church in Gobber, was led by Father Peter Vincent, the Anglican priest of St. Thomas's, and was aided by a Methodist clergyman, the Reverend Raymond Smith. Over the next 8 hours, Michael would repeatedly have crucifixes stuffed inside of his mouth while being doused with holy water. Okay, now my jaw hurts. According to Bill Ellis, an authority on folklore and the occult in contemporary culture, the exorcists believed that they had, in this all-night ceremony, invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including those of incest, bestiality, blasphemy, and lewdness. In the end, exhausted, they allowed Taylor to go home, although they felt that at least 3 demons were still left in him. While at home, he brutally ended his wife, Christine, by attacking her with his bare hands, tearing her eyes and tongue out, and almost tearing her face off. He was eventually found by a policeman, completely naked in the street and covered in red fluid. At his trial in March, he was acquitted on the grounds of insanity. He was sent to Broadmoor Hospital for 2 years, then spent another 2 years in a secure ward in Bradford before being released. I'm seeing some repeating factors here, are you? Finally, in first place, we have Arne Cheyenne Johnson, otherwise known as the Devil Made Me Do It. Now, before I talk about his exact crime, we have to explain how he came to be possessed. Satan originally possessed David Glatzel, the 11-year-old brother of his fiancée, who was living with the couple. Strange happenings first began in the summer, when young David would jolt awake in the middle of the night, sobbing in fear after being visited by a hideous creature that he described as a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hooves. The beastly apparition had issued a warning. Beware. Very quickly, the visions amplified, with David's beast now haunting him during the daytime. Each time the child experienced a visitation, deep scratches would appear on the front door of the family's home, and red marks would appear on David's body. Thankfully, everyone in the household believed his claims. According to his sister Debbie, it was out of character for him to lie, describing that he never liked anything spooky, not even scary comic books. Becoming increasingly worried for young David, a priest was summoned to bless the house, but that accomplished a big fat nada. The possession had escalated to such heights that the family were now taking shifts to monitor him during the night. Eventually, the involvement of paranormal investigators, some of my favorite people to discuss on this channel, Ed and Lorraine Warren, was begged for, and luckily for the family, they were available. With her strong powers of clairvoyance, Lorraine described encountering a black misty form during her first meeting with David, knowing immediately she and Ed were dealing with something of a negative nature. Lorraine has stated over the course of several visits, David made numerous references to ending in stabbings. In an attempt to save David from his endless tormentors, Arne taunted the demons during exorcisms to enter his body and leave the boy alone. And sadly, the challenge was accepted.
Number 1 on this list is the Panama exorcisms. Now, I wish that I could describe exactly the ongoings of these exorcisms, but sadly, we only have access to the aftermath of what transpired here. The Panama exorcisms happened in an indigenous jungle area of Panama and resulted in the murder of 7 people. The bodies of these 7 people included the likes of a pregnant woman, 5 of her children, and their neighbor. They were found in a mass grave and looked to be only the beginning of the murders if these murderous exorcisms hadn't been stopped when they were. That's because 15 other people were freed from captivity when the police raided the area. Apparently, an indigenous-run sect had been performing so-called exorcisms and murdering people if they hadn't fully repented for their sins. The prosecutor of this case is quoted saying they were performing a ritual inside the structure. In that ritual, there were people being held against their will, being mistreated. All of these rites were aimed at killing them if they didn't repent their sins. The place where they were performing these exorcisms was a church where they found a naked woman, machetes, and a ritually sacrificed goat amongst other religious paraphernalia. What this group did was kidnap people and then bring them here to perform what they thought was God's will. The leader of the group said that they had received a message from God and that's why they were doing this. This brutal atrocity only happened a little over a year ago as well, so it's still very fresh. I don't know exactly what happened in these exorcisms, but we do know that it resulted in the murder of 7 innocent people, which is just about as scary and sad as you can get. Number 5 on this list is the exorcism of Emma Schmidt. Emma Schmidt's exorcism was a widely publicized affair that happened in 1928. What's interesting about this case is that Emma Schmidt had actually been the subject of an exorcism from the same exorcist in 1912. Father Riesinger was the one who performed the exorcism in 1912, and when he heard about how she'd become possessed again, he rushed to help her. However, this time he didn't expect the demon to have as strong as a hold on her soul as it did. Now, it's written that after Father Riesinger began to perform the exorcism, Emma dislodged herself from her bed and from the hands of her guards, and her body, carried through the air, landed high above the door of the room and clung to the wall with a tenacious grip. All present were struck with a trembling fear. The nuns who were present and assisting reportedly grabbed her and strapped her back down to the bed, even though she was screaming and squirming in unnatural ways. It's said that this exorcism required 23 days to complete, and during that time, Emma would regularly be vomiting up bile and fighting as much as she could to stop it from happening. It's even said that Lucifer appeared during this exorcism and made his presence known by attacking the exorcist at one point. Emma also had super strength and was able to bend the iron bars on her bed, even though she was extremely malnourished at that point. Father Riesinger was mentally drained and exhausted after the 23 days of performing that exorcism and claims that he had never seen anything like that in his time on Earth. Number 4 on this list is the movie The Exorcist. Now, The Exorcist is one of the most famous horror films of all time and is sometimes credited as being the scariest movie of the genre. Now, the movie The Exorcist is actually based off of a real-life exorcism that took place in the 1940s. This was an exorcism of a 14-year-old boy documented under the pseudonym Roland Doe. Supernatural events took place during this exorcism, which then inspired the creation of the film several decades later. Rather than look at the actual exorcisms here though, I actually want to look at the creation of the movie The Exorcist, because there's actually a curse that surrounds it. Jack McGowan, the man who plays the film director in the movie, died before the film actually hit the big screens. He died due to influenza that he got in 1973. Vasiliki Malaros, who also acted in the movie, died before the movie was seen by anyone. Many people who were involved in filming of the movie lost their family members whilst the movie was in production. There was also a report of another one of the actors almost dying in a near-fatal motorcycle crash. This was all coupled with the fact that in the early production of the movie, the entire set caught fire because a bird flew into the circuit box. There were several other crazy mishaps that went on during the filming of this movie, along with the actual premiere, which was then hit with a lot of controversy. All of this has led people to believe that there is actually a curse tied to the movie and the entire production of it. Some believe that the demon from the initial exorcism in the 1940s came back to incite some chaos on the team recreating the story. Whatever the case was, it's certainly pretty crazy that one of the scariest movies of all time had one of the most controversial and scary filming processes of all time as well. Number 2 on this list is the exorcisms of Saint Guthlac. He's often referred to as Saint Anthony the Great in Orthodox Christianity and is one of the greatest hermit saints of the early English Church. He was born in 673 and was very attractive to demons. I found a passage that would actually describe these demons, and I'm going to read that out now. They were ferocious in appearance, terrible in shape, with great heads, long necks, thin faces, yellow complexions, filthy beards, shaggy ears, wild foreheads, fierce eyes, foul mouths, horses' teeth, throats vomiting flames, twisted jaws, thick lips, strident voices, singed hair, fat cheeks, pigeon's breast, scabby thighs, knotty knees, crooked legs, swollen ankles, splay feet, spreading mouths, raucous cries. For they grew so terrible to hear with their mighty shriekings that they filled almost the whole intervening space between earth and heaven with their discordant bellowings. That's the passage, and even though that's some pretty bad stuff, and they would actually go on to beat him with iron bars, he claimed that he wasn't afraid of these demons. That being said though, he did realize that they had to go. Guthlac was actually approached by the holy apostle Bartholomew and given a whip. This whip was what he used to eradicate the demons from himself and ultimately become one of the most famous exorcists. A famous tale from Saint Guthlac was an exorcism that he performed on a man named Ecke. Ecke was deeply possessed by a demon and required the help of Guthlac. Daniel Esperanza, an expert on the subject, writes, Guthlac took off his belt, wrapped it around Ecke's waist, and squeezed it until the demon was breathed out. That means, guys, that during this exorcism, Ecke literally threw up a demon. I personally cannot imagine how horrible that would have been to get squeezed so hard that you throw up a demon. I suppose it's actions like that which have made Saint Guthlac's name live forever. Number 1 on this list is the exorcism of Fenton Lambert. Fenton Lambert was a 64-year-old man when he had his exorcism done to him. He lived in the 1700s and was a common worker. He had a wife and they had a son. However, their son died at a young age from disease. Fenton was a religious man and regularly went to church and prayed. He believed in God and knew in his heart that he was looking out for their best interests. His wife wasn't nearly as devout though. After the death of their son, she went into a deep depression and couldn't understand how God could possibly let their child die like that. Fenton tried to convince her that she needed to remain faithful, but knew that she never fully bought into that way of life again. One thing he wasn't aware of though, was how far she'd went in the other direction. One evening he woke up to find his wife staring over top of him. He was laying on the bed and he was tied down so that he couldn't move. He squirmed and tried to protest, but his wife wasn't having any of it. He could see that by the look in her eyes she was clearly not connected to reality anymore. She started to chant some demonic ritual of some kind, words that Fenton had never heard come from her mouth before. Then his wife procured a knife and brought it to Fenton's chest. She continued her chant and then began cutting into him, not deep enough to kill, but enough to cause a serious laceration. Fenton was squirming as much as he could and through his struggling got his left hand free. He hit his wife to the ground and quickly freed his other hand before she could get back to him. Recovered from the hit, she jumped on him and tried to get him back into his restraints. The pair tussled until Fenton once again threw her to the ground where she stumbled and landed on her knife. She proceeded to slowly bleed out in front of her husband's eyes. Days later, he found her journal in the home and saw that she'd been planning to perform an exorcism on him for months. In this instance though, the one performing the exorcism was very clearly the one possessed by something sinister.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the exorcism of Roland Doe. This is a famous one. Even if you haven't heard of Roland himself, you've heard of the works he's inspired. We all know of William Friedkin's Oscar-winning movie The Exorcist, right? Well, that was based on a book of the same title written by William Peter Blatty, which in turn was inspired by claims surrounding the exorcism of Roland Doe. It took a while, but this story made it into the homes of horror fans around the world. Back in the 1940s, priests of the Roman Catholic Church caught wind of a victim of demonic possession. The victim was a 14-year-old boy under the pseudonym of Roland Doe. Some say that the alias Robbie Mannheim was used as well. Either way, he underwent a series of exorcisms performed by different priests. First, a Lutheran pastor who claimed that he saw furniture moving around by itself. After witnessing this, he recommended the boy's parents reach out to a Catholic priest. Thus began a procession of priests coming through and attempting to remove demons from poor Roland. During these exorcisms, many strange things happened. Roland managed to snag a bed spring and use it as a weapon, slashing the attending priest. Another pair of priests claimed to see a shaking bed and flying objects, along with the boy speaking in a demonic voice and avoiding sacred objects with all his might. The final exorcism saw Roland break the nose of the priests trying to assist him. Thankfully, after this incident, Roland went on to live a normal and largely undemonic life. After all the hubbub, plenty of skeptics and other interested parties investigated the exorcism. Much of the recorded information that people referred to when discussing the series of events turned out to be hearsay, and there really is little evidence to prove any of it actually happened. In fact, it does seem like Roland suffered from some sort of mental illness, and writers thought it was a great story to exploit. Still, the treatment this boy received thanks to shaky claims of demonic possession is scary enough. Coming in at number 4, we've got the exorcism of Michael Taylor. The year was 1974. Family man Michael Taylor lived with his wife and 5 kids in Ossett, an English market town near Wakefield. Most folks knew him as a relatively easygoing man, although he did suffer from depression linked to a back injury sustained years ago. The townsfolk were particularly religious, but the Taylors were not. This led a friend of the family to attempt to ease his pain through spirituality. She brought him to a church group and he became part of the religious community. Leading this group was a 21-year-old pastor by the name of Mary Robinson. As Michael spent more time with the fellowship, his wife, Christine, grew suspicious. Michael and Mary started spending lots of time together, engaging in activities like staying up all night and making the sign of the cross at each other to ward off evil. In fact, Michael's personality changed entirely. He adopted very strange beliefs and was bad-tempered around the house. Christine decided she'd had enough. She called him out in front of a large gathering of people, causing him to lash out. All in attendance claimed that something came over him as he screamed in tongues and flailed about. Eventually, he was restrained by a group of people and everyone decided it would be best if an exorcism was performed. 2 ministers were brought to Ossett to go through with it, and it ended up lasting overnight. Michael screamed and flailed and scratched and bit the whole time, prompting the ministers to tie him to the floor. They claimed that over 40 demons had possessed Michael and they weren't going to leave easily. In fact, the priests succumbed to exhaustion at 8 a.m. the next morning. They told Michael and Christine to head home and rest up for the final part of the exorcism, which in hindsight was a bad call. Now, whether or not demons actually infested Michael can never be proven, but what he did next definitely can be. A couple of hours after being sent home, Michael was found covered in blood. He had killed Christine as well as their pet dog. The entire living room was covered in blood and Christine's face had been ripped off. Michael had succumbed to something terrible and murdered his wife after his awful exorcism. Something tells me the church's intervention might not have helped poor Mike, and it definitely didn't help Christine. Coming in at number 3, we've got the exorcism of Terrence Cottrell. This is just terrible. In 2003, a young boy named Terrence Cottrell was brought to a church by his mother. There was to be a prayer service for the young lad at the strip mall-based place of worship. Terrence had autism, which his mother had decided was caused by evil spirits. The prayer service was intended to drive these spirits out of Terrence's body and cure him of his condition. But it wasn't just prayer that these folks employed. Members of the congregation were to sit on Terrence's limbs in order to ensure he stayed still, while the pastor, Ray Hemphill, sat on his chest and whispered to the demons. This went on for hours as Terrence struggled, but eventually he gave in and suffocated. In the investigation that followed, it was discovered that Ray Hemphill had never received any formal religious training and was actually ordained by his brother. He was not qualified to be performing an exorcism, nor was he really ready to be leading services. What bothers me the most is how blindly the folks of the church followed his lead, allowing him to literally suffocate an 8-year-old boy. No charges were laid against the other people involved in the terrible ritual, as they all cited their Fifth Amendment right to refuse to testify in order to protect themselves. My goodness.
Number 2. Gottliebin Dittus, 1842. Our next entry takes us to the German village of Mottlingen in 1842. Residents of this sleepy village started to notice strange noises and odd goings-on at the home of a 28-year-old woman named Gottliebin Dittus, who believed that her house was being haunted by the ghost of a woman who was always seen carrying a baby in her arms. Dittus began being affected and would drift in and out of a trance-like state, seemingly blacking out for days at a time. The local pastor, Johann Christoph Blumhardt, took it upon himself to free Dittus of her affliction, which had lasted for 2 whole years before he got involved. He claimed that Dittus was possessed by several demons, as well as the spirit of the woman that she had reported seeing, who Blumhardt believed to be the ghost of a local murderous widow who had been known for burying children in a nearby field. The exorcisms he performed on Dittus were horrific, with her reportedly vomiting blood, broken glass, and even nails. The exorcisms continued until one day Dittus appeared to snap out of her possession, declaring that all the demons and spirits had been cast out and that Jesus was the victor. Number 1. Clara Cele, 1906. In one of the first documented exorcisms in South Africa, a 16-year-old orphan named Clara Germaaina Cele was staying at the Marion Hill Mission School in Umzinto when she began exhibiting violent behavior. The behavior became more and more extreme until one day the teen began growling, tearing at her clothes, and demanding to speak with the local priest, Father Erasmus Horner. Clara confessed to the priest that she had made a deal with the devil himself, and when the nuns tried to pour holy water on her, her skin began to burn. She would go wild and convulse at the sight of religious iconography, showed immense strength disproportionate to her size, and she began speaking languages that the young teen could not possibly know. When Clara began levitating in front of them, the priest and the nuns got permission to perform an exorcism on her. The exorcism was a wild ordeal, with Clara trying to strangle the priests, levitating at various times, and in perhaps the most horrifying and amazing moment of the ritual, transforming into a serpent who bit one of the nuns. The exorcism lasted for 2 full days and was performed in front of 170 people. By the end of the second day, the demon reportedly caused Clara to levitate one last time before leaving her body, never to return. Clara was demon-free, but unfortunately died 6 years later of heart failure at the age of 22.
Number 5, the black lace veil. Now, while I obviously love the idea of a cute gothy aesthetic, this is anything but. After one of their public lectures, Ed Warren was conversing with a couple that had been in the audience, where the boy introduced himself as Alan and explained that he'd brought his girlfriend Lonnie to the lecture because he suspected that she'd been overtaken by some sort of occult influence. Which, hey, that sounds like my mom talking about me. He explained that when his girlfriend became angry, her features would change into something resembling a wolf, and then the voice of a different person would speak from inside of her. When Lorraine walked over to join the group, Ed's wife, Lonnie experienced an episode of instantaneous possession and lurched out in an attempt to attack Lorraine. This incident terrified everyone in the vicinity, with the Warrens ending the audience chat session immediately before Ed escorted the couple to an offstage room while Lorraine stayed outside to, get everybody out of there. In the backstage room, the girl was fully under possession, breathing heavily, and her facial features had transformed into the wolf-like appearance the boy was talking about. Now, after about 10 minutes, the possession did pass, and Lonnie was lucid enough to explain dealing with memory loss, along with losing hours and days of her life over the last 3 months, which is a symptom that's pretty common in cases of possession. She went on to share her background, that she was a girl wealthy enough to buy whatever she wanted, but money can't always buy love. Originally, her now boyfriend Alan had refused all of her advances and bribery attempts at becoming hers, so she had resorted to visiting a store prominent in selling tools to help with witchcraft, purchasing there a book on the black arts, and later that night performing a ritual for acquiring lovers. This ritual involved, you guessed it, the black lace veil, on top of which she placed a crown of goat horns for renouncing God in her baptism, along with swearing allegiance to Satan, finishing the ritual by washing down the vow with a cup of animal life force. Easy stuff. We've all got that in our homes, right? Just me? About a month after Lonnie performed the ritual, Alan began paying her the attention she craved, making her entitled world perfect. What she hadn't counted on, however, was that she was now in debt to the demonic, having given them permission to enter her life. Ed knew immediately that Lonnie would have to undergo an exorcism as soon as possible, and made contact with the priest the next morning, who was able to come assist with the procedure. Upon arrival, the priest insisted on testing the spirit, which, it makes sense, so he instructed Lonnie to close her eyes and slowly count to 20, while his assistant stood behind her and placed a cross 6 inches behind her head. The entity possessing the girl suddenly went wild, screaming, "Take it away, it burns, take it away." During the exorcism, it kept screaming, she's mine, her soul is mine," in reference to, Lonnie. Now, it was eventually separated from Lonnie, but just before it departed, the thing vowed it would return to another. The Warrens brought the black lace veil, goat horns, cup, and conjuring book home with them, so Lonnie would be safe from repossession, but the tale of the veil doesn't end here. Oh, I love a good rhyme. Ed received a phone call one day from a man named John Rand, who wanted him to meet his daughter Charlene, who he explained possessed a natural knowledge of what he took to be witchcraft. When she stared at people, even when they weren't aware of it, she'd fill their mind with inhuman terror. Honestly, I support this skill. John called Ed specifically because Charlene was manifesting different personalities, some male, some female, and some that couldn't even be called human, but all of them were making extremely threatening statements to John and his wife. Upon bringing Charlene to visit various doctors and clergymen, they recommended John be put in contact with Ed Warren, and Ed agreed to have the girl and her father visit his home the next weekend. Now, when Ed attempted to shake Charlene's hand upon meeting her, she backed away and stared distrustfully at him, keeping track of every move he made. His attempts to question her resulted in no-end answers, and her eyes began to wander around the room in boredom. When they landed on the black veil, though, Charlene jumped up, grabbed the veil, and clutched it to her chest. Her features immediately began to transform into those of a wild, sneering creature, distinct from this otherwise, beautiful girl. Ed drew 2 vials of water to himself, one unblessed, the other blessed by an exorcist, and moved away from what was no longer Charlene, but some sort of inhuman spirit, a lesser devil of hell. A lesser devil of hell. Horrid moaning and various animal sounds came from the girl as Ed blessed her, banishing the demon away for a now second time. The items have thankfully been locked away in the museum ever since. Number 4, the case of Anneliese Michel. She grew up practicing Christianity in Bavaria, West Germany, back in the 1960s, where she attended Mass twice a week. We love the dedication. Now, when Anneliese was only 16, she suddenly blacked out at school and began walking around in what her friends and family described as a trance-like state, and she herself was unable to recall any of it. A year later, she experienced a similar occurrence where she woke up in a trance after her body went through a series of convulsions, causing it to shake uncontrollably. After this, Anneliese visited a neurologist who diagnosed her with temporal lobe epilepsy, a disorder that causes seizures, loss of memory, and, experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations. After her diagnoses, Anneliese began taking medication for her epilepsy and enrolled in university. Now, if that medication was successful, I wouldn't be talking about her right now, would I? The medication she was given failed to help her, and as the year progressed, her condition got way worse. She began to see the face of the devil wherever she went, and constantly heard demons whispering in her ears. When she heard the demons telling her she was damned and would rot in hell while she was praying, she concluded that the devil himself must be possessing her. Anneliese sought out priests to help her with her demonic possession, but all the clergy she approached rejected her request, saying that she should seek medical help and that they would need the permission of a bishop to do anything. So at this point, Anneliese's state had become extreme. With the knowledge that she was possessed consuming her, she constantly ripped the clothes off her body, compulsively performed up to 400 squats a day, crawled under a table, and barked like a dog for 2 days. She also ate spiders and coal, bit the head off a dead bird, and licked her own fluids from the floor. Yeah, I'm totally not queasy. Why do you ask? Finally, she and her mother found a priest, Ernst Alt, who believed in her possession, stating that she didn't look like an epileptic. If I'm taking this with a grain of salt, I'd like to know what his definition of an epileptic looks like. But Anneliese wrote to the priest saying, "I am nothing, everything about me is vanity. What should I do? I have to improve. Please pray for me. I want to suffer for other people, but this is so cruel." Now, Ernst petitioned the local bishop, Bishop Joseph Stangl, who eventually approved the request and granted local priest Arnold Renz the permission to perform an exorcism, but ordered that it be carried out in total secrecy. Okay, being granted an exorcism in the 70s was like winning a lottery. They were very rarely granted due to the sensationalism caused by the release of the Exorcist movie, and the Catholic Church was determined to protect your reputation at the time. Reputation on exorcisms at the time, okay? Over the next 10 months, following the bishop's approval of this exorcism, Ernst and Arnold conducted 67 acts. We're talking like lasting up to 4 hours per session on the poor woman. Absolutely heinous. Throughout these sessions, Anneliese revealed that she was possessed by 6 demons, Lucifer, Cain, and Nero, amongst others. All these spirits would jostle for control of Anneliese's body and would communicate from her mouth with a low growl. The demons constantly argued with each other, with one being quoted as saying, "People are stupid as pigs. They think it's all over after death, it goes on," and another replying that the first was nothing but a big mouth who had no real say in hell. Throughout these sessions and exorcisms, Anneliese would frequently talk about dying to make up for the wayward youth of the day and the apostate priests of the modern church. She broke the bones and ripped the tendons in her knees from continually kneeling in prayer, and I just felt that statement in my own ballet-worn knees. Ouch! Over these 10 months, Anneliese was frequently restrained so the priests can conduct exorcism rites. She slowly stopped eating and eventually passed from malnutrition and dehydration on July 1st of 1976 at only 23 years old. Number 3, Michael Taylor. So back in the 1970s, Michael Taylor was largely an ordinary figure in the town of Ossett, Yorkshire. He, his wife Christine, 5 descendants, and their pet poodle lived peaceful and happy lives. And now to pop that little Stepford Wives bubble. In 1974, Christine stated to a Christian fellowship group, to which they both belonged, that his relationship with the leader of the group, Marie Robinson, was carnal in nature. Michael admitted that he felt evil within him and eventually attacked Marie verbally, who screamed back at him. Marie stated that his eyes began to change to something bestial, and that he began to speak in tongues. Now, Michael had no memory of the event, something all too common in cases of possession. During the next meeting, he received an absolution, but his behavior continued to become more erratic. As a result, the local vicar called in other ministers experienced in deliverance and preparation to cast out the demons residing within the man. The exorcism, which occurred between the 5th and 6th of October of 1974 at St. Thomas's Church in Gobber, was led by Father Peter Vincent, the Anglican priest of St. Thomas's, and was aided by a Methodist clergyman, the Reverend Raymond Smith. Now, over the next 8 hours, Michael would repeatedly have crucifixes stuffed inside of his mouth while being doused with holy water. According to Bill Ellis, an authority on folklore and the occult in contemporary culture, the exorcist believed that they had, in an all-night ceremony, invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including those of incest, bestiality, blasphemy, and lewdness. In the end, exhausted, they allowed Taylor to go home, although they felt that there were at least like 3 demons still kicking around in his body. While at home, Taylor brutally ended his wife, Christine, by attacking her with his bare hands, tearing her eyes and tongue out, and almost tearing her face off. Completely naked in the street and covered in her red fluids. At his trial in March, Taylor was acquitted on the grounds of insanity. He was sent to Broadmoor Hospital for 2 years, and then spent another 2 years in a secure ward in Bradford before being released.
Number 5 on this list is the exorcism of Dan Abudani. Dan was a young adult living in Malaysia who ran a local business that he inherited from his father. He sold textiles and did okay for himself, certainly not getting rich, but also not being dirt poor either. For reasons unbeknownst to him, Dan started to notice some strange ongoings at his store. He had been running it for roughly a year, and all of a sudden, strange things started to happen. The lights, which were brand new, would flicker uncontrollably and then just as quickly stop as if nothing happened. The register would sometimes just open without warning, as if some ghost thief was trying to rob Dan. A harsh wind would blow his textiles when there was no window or door open for wind to blow through. Dan was never somebody to believe in the paranormal or anything like that, but his late father was, and he remembered him telling him a legend of a family who was killed on this area of land prior to them erecting their textile company. After some months of these ongoings, he finally decided to get in contact with somebody who knew something about the supernatural, and they recommended getting an exorcism done. Dan was reluctant at first, but finally caved and had an exorcist brought in to see if they could do anything. After examining the space, the exorcist insisted that not only a ritual be performed on the storefront, but also one be performed on Dan to make sure that no demon was clinging on to anything in the space. If Dan was going to go down this route, then he had better do what they tell him, so he agreed. He was strapped down to a chair in the back of the store, and the exorcist began performing their ritual. At first nothing happened, but then the wind started to pick up, the lights started to flicker, and the register began operating as if it had a mind of its own. A deep shadow filled the room, and even though the lights were on, it felt like darkness was overpowering them. The exorcist was chanting his ritual as loudly as he could at this point, trying with all of his ability to exorcise whatever was occupying the space. Just as it felt like he might be making progress, a deep voice boomed throughout the space and said, "Leave my home." Just as that finished, a pair of scissors that was lying on one of Dan's workbenches flew from where it was and pierced the exorcist directly in his neck. He fell to the ground and life slowly left his body, with Dan strapped to the chair, unable to help him. Dan was found in his store 2 days later by a neighbor, extremely dehydrated and close to death. He told the police what I told you, but they didn't believe him, and he went to jail for murder. A really sad story of a young guy who just happened to own the wrong store at the wrong time. Number 4 on this list is the most famous case from the notable exorcist, Father Vincenzo Taraborelli. Father Vincenzo Taraborelli is one of the most known exorcists in the world. He's stationed in Rome and well into his 80s at this point. The Catholic Church has been attempting to find a successor for his role, but no priest wants to take on the deep mental strain that it will cause them. Now, it's said that Father Vincenzo Taraborelli will see up to 30 people in one day. He often urges someone who intends to become an exorcist to regularly see a psychologist, as the job is incredibly draining. The exorcism that we're going to look at from him today is one case that has actually spanned over 13 years. The woman was deeply possessed, and it took over a decade for Father Vincenzo to eventually oust the demon. He spoke about the ongoings of these exorcisms in an interview back in 2016, and he will do a far better job explaining the situation than me. So I quote, "Another man who was a Satanist wanted her. She refused, so this man told her, 'You'll pay for this.' He cast so-called spells to attract her to him twice a week. Then they came to me in this room. I started to pray, and she went into a trance. She would blurt out insults, blasphemies. I quickly understood she was possessed. As the rite continued, she started feeling worse and worse. So when I told the devil, 'In the name of Jesus, I order you to go away,' she started to vomit little metal pins, 5 at a time. Aside from pins, she would also vomit hair braids, little stones, pieces of wood. It sounds like something from another world, right? Instead, it's something from this world." End quote. That last sentence really gets to me. It sounds like something from another world, but instead it's something from this world. And that's exactly what I thought when I first heard this story. How on earth is it possibly real for someone to vomit up little stones or pieces of wood? Frankly, I would be petrified if I saw someone doing that, and I completely understand why Father Vincenzo recommends seeing a psychologist before you take on this role. Number 3 on this list is the exorcism of Beatrice Clement. Beatrice Clement was a young woman who was said to have lived in the 9th century. She was a mother of 2 children, and her husband was a butcher. At about the time she turned 30 years old, she started to experience episodes. These were episodes of psychosis that would be accompanied by deep hallucinations. It became increasingly apparent that her mental state was draining, and the reality that she thought she lived in was far different than the truth. As with many other things back then, these episodes were chalked up to the work of the devil. Her husband, her children, her neighbors, everybody believed that a demon was in charge of her soul at this point. This obviously meant that an exorcism was in order. An exorcist was brought into Beatrice's home and was intended to eradicate the demon from her soul. The methods of these exorcisms were brutal though. It often involved Beatrice withholding food and water, and other means of torture that were ultimately ineffective at getting rid of the demon. This went on for several weeks until it became increasingly clear that it wasn't working how they intended. One evening, Beatrice snuck out of her home and decided to take her own life. She couldn't manage to make it through one more exorcism, but truly believed in her soul that she was a danger to society in her present state. The sad thing about this whole story is that she most likely wasn't possessed by a demon at all. Some form of mental illness manifested itself in her and sadly led to her death months later.
Coming in at number 2, we've got the exorcism of the Ammons family. Most exorcisms involve one person possessed by multiple demons, right? Well, what about a whole family possessed by demons? Apparently this did indeed happen in Indianapolis. In 2011, LaToya Ammons and her family moved into a rental house along with LaToya's mother. Soon after they settled in, they noticed that an unnatural amount of black flies were swarming their porch. If that doesn't seem too weird to you, keep in mind that this was in December. They did their best to get rid of these pesky insects, but they just kept coming back. They would also hear footsteps throughout the house late at night and would often find doors swung open that they knew they'd left closed. One night, a dark figure was seen pacing in the living room, leaving wet boot prints behind. Things only got weirder from there. Late one night, following the funeral of a loved one of Ammons' children levitated above her bed for all to see. After seeking help from a team of clairvoyants, the demonic possession got even worse. The children would don evil smiles, and their eyes would bulge as they discussed satanic things and conversed with people who weren't there. After one particularly bad incident ended up sending 2 of her boys to the hospital, medical staff witnessed the 9-year-old son walk backwards up a wall. All of this craziness led to the Department of Child Services getting involved, and the children were taken into custody. This prompted Ammons to take more decisive action. She brought in a priest who sought official permission to perform an exorcism. Bishop Dale Melchick was reluctant, but Reverend Michael Maginot sought help from other priests who had performed exorcisms. Eventually the house was cleansed of demonic presence, but not before Ammons was put through hell. The story does have a happy ending though, as 6 months after her children were taken into DCS custody, LaToya was able to welcome them back home. Honestly, this is a very interesting read, so go check out the whole story in the description. And finally, at number 1, we've got Anneliese Michel. We started with the basis for an exorcism movie and will end with the basis for an exorcism movie. Anneliese's story was eventually turned into The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Originally, it was a tale from Germany. When Anneliese was 16, she was diagnosed with psychosis caused by temporal lobe epilepsy. However, being a devout churchgoer, she and her family were convinced that she was possessed by a demon. They did try to help her condition using medications, but after 5 years with no improvement, they were desperate for results. The family appealed to the Catholic Church, which reluctantly sent 2 priests to attempt to exorcise the young woman. When the exorcisms began, the parents stopped consulting doctors. These events, in conjunction with each other, led to the untimely death of Anneliese. 67 exorcism sessions were performed, during which Anneliese refused food and water. She succumbed to malnourishment and dehydration. Her parents, as well as the priests, were found guilty of negligent homicide for their actions. My word.
Number 5. Amy Stamatis, 2006. Amy Stamatis was a nurse living in Searcy, Arkansas, and working at a hospital in the nearby town of Little Rock. The then 49-year-old was writing reports and suddenly realized that she had completely forgotten her training and could not remember any of the details of how to do her job. Not being able to continue in the field that she had dedicated her life to, she was forced to resign her post. Despite having been a jogger for years, she suddenly found herself unable to engage in that activity either. One by one, the things that brought her joy were suddenly becoming out of reach. Her mental condition worsened with incidents of her hearing voices, removing her clothes in public, suddenly screaming at loved ones, and climbing a 7-story parking ramp with the intention of leaping off of it. Although police officers managed to talk her down from this incident, the voices she was hearing continued to convince her to commit acts of self-harm, culminating in her jumping from the 2nd-story window of her house, resulting in her becoming paralyzed from the waist down. While she was recovering in the hospital, she received a visitor, a Pentecostal evangelist named Cindy Lawson, who claimed to have successfully performed 10 real exorcisms before, having witnessed people's eyes changing colors during the ritual, and even a few cases of levitation. Lawson claimed that God had spoken to her and told her to go to the hospital where she would find Amy, who was unknowingly possessed by demons. Stamatis agreed to let Lawson perform an exorcism, and though she has no memory of how the event went down, family members who were present claimed to see an instant change in Amy after it was complete. Number 4. The infamous Arne Johnson case. 1981. In 1981, a young boy in Brookfield, Connecticut named David Glatzel began having vivid night terrors. As time went on, these nightmares began infiltrating his everyday life, with him seeing haunting figures such as an old man with a white beard, a man with big black eyes and animalistic features and jagged teeth. He then began engaging in bizarre behavior like kicking, biting, seizures, and marks of strangulation appearing out of nowhere. His family reached out to Ed and Lorraine Lorraine Warren who concluded that David was possessed by a demon. Priests performed 3 exorcisms on David, which supposedly caused him to levitate. In the chaos, the boyfriend of Debbie, David's older sister, Arne Johnson, confronted the demon and told it to leave the child alone and to take him instead. David made a full recovery, but the demon decided to take Arne up on his offer. A few months later, Arne stabbed his landlord to death, and upon apprehension claimed that the devil made him do it. His trial marked the first time in history that someone entered a plea of not guilty for reasons of demonic possession, although this plea was rejected. David was charged with manslaughter and served 5 years of his 20-year sentence, and ended up marrying Debbie Glatzer. Their story was loosely adapted into the third Conjuring film, which follows Ed and Lorraine Warren's involvement with the case.
Number 5 on this list is the Panama 7. The following story happened only a few years ago and is a horrifying tale where 7 people in Panama were found dead from a terrifying ritual. The BBC writes 10 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder. The suspects and all victims were thought to belong to the Nagobi indigenous community. The grave was discovered after 3 villagers escaped and made their way to a local hospital last weekend, prosecutor Rafael Baloy said. They then alerted authorities about several families being held by an indigenous-run sect. On Wednesday, police raided the community located in a jungle region in northwest Panama, some 250 kilometers from the capital Panama City. They were performing a ritual inside the structure. In that ritual, there were people being held against their will, being mistreated, said Mr. Balois. All of these rites were aimed at killing them if they didn't repent their sins. Inside the makeshift church, officers found a naked woman, machetes, knives, and a ritually sacrificed goat, Mr. Balois said. The site was controlled by a religious sect called the New Light of God, believed to have been operating in the region for about 3 months. According to Mr. Balois, the kidnapping and torture started last Saturday after one of the members claimed to have received a message from God. The victims were then kidnapped from their homes, beaten, and So let me ask you guys, does that sound like something that God would tell you to do? Gather up a bunch of people, hold them against their will, and torture and kill them? To me, if any sort of entity was to tell you to do something like that, then that would be a demon or maybe the devil. Maybe that demonic entity would portray themselves as God or someone else, but I don't know what type of God would do something like this. To be completely honest, folks, I'm really not a religious person, so when I hear something like this, I believe that this was the work of people who were extremely sick or misguided. But I can guarantee to them, they probably really felt like they were acting as the vessel for some higher being. I think in this instance though, they really did misjudge who that higher being was. This happened literally back in 2020 as well, guys, so really not that long ago. My heart truly does go out to the people that were killed and to the families of those who were taken way too soon. Number 4 on this list is The Devil Made Me Do It. This famous Ed and Lorraine case may be the best example of when someone tried to claim a demonic possession led to a crime. The case is centered around a young man named Arne Cheyenne Johnson and the man that he murdered, a 40-year-old named Alan Bono. Mental Floss says there was no question that Johnson killed Bono. However, his defense attorney, 33-year-old Martin Minella, planned to argue that the 19-year-old was not guilty by virtue of demonic possession. Ahead of the trial, Minella pled his case through the media, giving interviews to major press outlets. The courts have dealt with the existence of God, and now they'll be asked to deal with the existence of the demonic spirit, Minella told People. The day after Johnson was arrested, Lorraine Warren called the Brookfield police and blamed the killing on a demon. Johnson didn't actually say the devil made him do it, he only claimed that he didn't remember stabbing Bono. However, according to the testimony of an officer on the scene, Johnson did tell the police, "I think I hurt someone." Now, this defense didn't actually work out for Johnson. He was inevitably convicted of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. However, he didn't serve nearly that many and was released after less than 5 years for being a really good prisoner. In my opinion, I kind of doubt that this guy was actually under the influence of a demonic possession, and clearly the jury, they felt the same way. That That being said though, he did seem pretty committed to that story during the trial, so I suppose it's something to consider.
Number 2, The Devil Made Me Do It. Now before I talk about this exact crime, we have to explain how it came to be. This tale starts with David Glatzel, the young brother of Arne Cheyenne Johnson's fiancée, who was living with the couple. Now strange happenings first began in the summer, when David would jolt awake in the middle of the night, sobbing in fear after being visited by a hideous creature that he described as a man with big black eyes, a thin face with animal features, jagged teeth, pointed ears, horns, and hooves. The beastly apparition had issued a warning. Beware. Very quickly, the visions amplified, with David's beast now haunting him during the daytime. Each time this youngling experienced a visitation, deep scratches would appear on the front door of the family's home, and red marks would appear on David's body. Everyone in the household believed the boy's claims, and according to his sister Debbie, it was out of character for him to lie, describing how he never liked anything spooky, like not even scary comic books. Increasingly worried for young David, a priest was summoned to bless the house, but that accomplished a big, fat nothing. The possession had escalated to such heights that the family were taking shifts to monitor the boy during the night. Eventually, the involvement of paranormal investigators, some of my favorite people to discuss, Ed and Lorraine Warren, was begged for, and luckily for the family, they were available. With her strong powers of clairvoyance, Lorraine described encountering a black misty form during her first meeting with David. Knowing immediately, she and Ed were dealing with something of a negative nature. Lorraine has stated that over the course of several visits, David made numerous references to death and, impaling. In an attempt to save David from his endless tormentors, Arne taunted the demons during exorcisms to enter his body and leave the boy alone. And what do you know? That challenge was accepted. Look, I'm all for saving young folks, but there's a limit. You don't want to actually invite demons into your body. But hey, many months after that fateful day, Arne's fiancée reported that he would go into a trance, where he would growl and say he saw the beast and later would have no memory of it. It was 6 months later, on the 16th of February in 1981, shortly after 6 p.m., that Arne brutally attacked his landlord, stabbing him in a frenzy as he growled like a beast while Debbie watched, unable to react. And the landlord passed away later that evening. Arne pleaded not guilty to the ending charge, with his defense being the demonic entity which inhabited his body had caused him to do it. Number 1. John Jenkin. In the summer of 2013, 25-year-old John from Cumbria, England, expressed fears that he would kill his mother. While in his deranged state, he approached a random van driver, put his hands in the air in a surrender motion, and cried out, "I am armed, but it's not in my hands." Desperate to avoid committing such an atrocity, John tried to end his life by downing a cocktail of whiskey, painkillers, LSD, and attempting to end himself in a river. He was discovered later that day, unstable and smeared with his own red fluid after, self-inflicting. After these events, John was admitted to a psychiatric hospital where staff judged him as low risk and released him. I'm no expert, but I'd hate to see high risk if that's considered minimal. Later that evening, he confessed to a group of friends that he was possessed by demons. "I am the devil, I need to confess." He said his mother had become aggressive and controlling after the events of that day, and that same night his sister Katie had confided in one of her own friends that she was really worried about her brother, saying that he didn't seem like her brother and he didn't look like him anymore. The next morning, after a brutal argument with his mother and sister, he went downstairs and hit his mother with lots of blows to her head with the sharp end of an axe, and when his sister came downstairs, he attacked her as well to stop her from screaming. I guess the sister was sadly right to be worried. After the killings, John was found stark naked, crouched behind a bench, acting erratically. When a police officer asked him if he had taken anything, he replied, "Lives." Now, a court has since sentenced him to a minimum of only 12 years in prison, if you can believe it.